The deception. Lucas Sinclair adjusted the lightweight fiberglass cast on his leg, ensuring it looked convincingly medical without causing actual discomfort. The wheelchair positioned by his bed completed the illusion. State-of-the-art, clearly expensive, and entirely unnecessary. "This is ridiculous, Lucas," said Eliza, his chief of staff, watching the proceedings with thinly veiled disapproval. "You're 34, not 14. Grown men don't play pretend." "It's not pretend," Lucas replied, testing how naturally he could position his supposedly injured limbs. "It's a security measure. Sinclair Technologies is worth $17 billion, and we're weeks away from announcing the quantum encryption breakthrough. I need someone I can trust in my home, and trust isn't something you can assess in an interview." At 6'2" with sharp features and calculating gray eyes, Lucas cut an intimidating figure in the technology world. Founder and CEO of the fastest-growing cybersecurity firm in North America, he had developed a well-earned reputation for brilliance tinged with paranoia. After his last assistant was caught photographing sensitive documents for a competitor, that paranoia had blossomed into something more elaborate. "So your solution is to pretend you were injured mountain climbing and hire a personal assistant to help with your recovery?" Eliza's air quotes were practically visible in her tone. "Temporary paralysis from spinal inflammation, with prognosis for full recovery within 8 weeks," Lucas corrected. "The medical documentation is thoroughly convincing. I had our legal team review it." "And the cameras monitoring every room in your house?" "That's not invasive at all," Eliza muttered. "I already had a comprehensive security system. I've simply optimized it for this purpose." Eliza sighed with the resignation of someone who had spent years managing the eccentricities of a genius. "The candidates will be here shortly. Try not to traumatize them with your little social experiment." After she left, Lucas surveyed his reflection in the bedroom mirror. He had the appearances covered: medical equipment, prescription bottles filled with vitamins, and a convincing wince whenever he accidentally moved too quickly. The real test would be psychological, maintaining the facade of vulnerability when every instinct in his body rejected appearing weak. For a man who had built an empire on digital fortresses and impenetrable firewalls, his own home had become the ultimate security test. Which of the carefully vetted candidates would steal when they thought no one was watching? Who would snoop through his files? Who would treat him differently once they believed he was physically compromised? The intercom chimed, announcing the first candidate's arrival. Lucas positioned himself in the wheelchair and navigated toward the study, where the interviews would be conducted. The first 3 candidates were precisely what he'd expected: polished resumes attached to people who couldn't quite hide their calculation when faced with his apparent disability. Each showed subtle but telling behaviors: exaggerated sympathy, speaking slightly louder as if injury affected hearing, or the particularly grating tendency to address questions about his care to Eliza, rather than to him directly. The 4th interview was running late. Lucas was about to call the whole thing off when Eliza escorted a somewhat disheveled young woman into the study. "Mr. Sinclair, this is Violet Mason. Her previous position was at Mercy Regional Hospital." Violet Mason was not what Lucas had expected. Where the previous candidates had arrived in impeccable business attire, she wore a simple blouse and pencil skirt that had clearly been hastily pressed. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical style, and she carried a worn leather portfolio instead of the designer bags the others had displayed. "I apologize for my tardiness, Mr. Sinclair," she said, her voice surprisingly steady for someone who appeared to be catching her breath. "There was an incident on the subway. A man had a seizure. I stayed until the paramedics arrived." Lucas noted she spoke directly to him, not to Eliza or vaguely toward the room as the others had done. Her eyes, an unusual shade that seemed to shift between blue and violet depending on the light, met his without the uncomfortable pity he'd grown to despise over the course of the afternoon. "You're a nurse?" he asked, reviewing the resume Eliza had provided. 5 years at Mercy Regional, primarily in rehabilitation and recovery," she confirmed. "I specialized in spinal injuries and post-surgical care." "And yet you're seeking employment as a personal assistant rather than continuing your medical career?" Lucas made the question deliberately pointed, watching for signs of discomfort. "Nursing is my calling, but the practical reality is that my brother needs tuition for engineering school." Violet's directness was refreshing. "This position pays significantly better, and my medical background should be useful for your recovery." What makes you think I need your medical expertise? My doctors have provided a comprehensive recovery plan. A flicker of something, amusement perhaps, crossed her face. With respect, Mr. Sinclair, even the best doctors aren't in the room at 3 a.m. when muscle spasms make sleep impossible, or when frustration with physical limitations reaches its breaking point. Recovery isn't just about following medical protocols. It's about adapting to temporarily changed circumstances while maintaining quality of life. Her answer caught him off guard. Unlike the previous candidates who had emphasized their discretion, efficiency, or connections, Violet Mason focused entirely on his well-being, and not in the superficial, pitying way he'd encountered throughout the day. The interview continued, with Violet responding to his increasingly difficult questions with unflustered composure. She neither overemphasized his disability nor pretended it didn't exist. She simply addressed it as one factor among many in a potential working relationship. After she left, Eliza returned with a knowing expression. Well, what did your trust-o-meter tell you about this one? Lucas tapped his fingers thoughtfully against the arm of his unnecessary wheelchair. She's either genuinely compassionate or an exceptional actress. So you'll continue your little charade to find out which? Begin the paperwork, Lucas confirmed. Ms. Mason starts tomorrow. What Lucas couldn't articulate, even to himself, was the unsettling feeling that for the first time in years, someone had looked at him and seen neither the billionaire tech mogul nor the apparently disabled man in a wheelchair. Violet Mason had simply seen a person, and that was more disarming than he cared to admit. Unexpected observations. Lucas sat in his monitoring room, a sleek space hidden behind his home office's bookshelves, watching as Violet moved efficiently through her morning routine. 2 weeks had passed since she'd begun working in his Pacific Heights mansion, and her behavior remained frustratingly consistent. No snooping through drawers, no unauthorized phone calls, no subtle theft of small valuables. Nothing to confirm his cynical expectations. Instead, she appeared on the monitors exactly as she presented herself in person. Methodical, compassionate, and oddly principled, she prepared his meals with careful attention to his supposed nutritional needs, organized his medication schedule, vitamins disguised as prescription drugs, and maintained his calendar with quiet efficiency. Most disconcertingly, she treated him exactly the same whether he was present or not. When alone, she never rolled her eyes at his requests or complained about his demands. The only notable difference was that sometimes when she thought herself unobserved, a shadow of worry would cross her face as she checked her phone, followed by quick calculations in a worn notebook she kept in her pocket. Find anything incriminating yet? Asked Eliza, entering the hidden room with her keycard. Secret calls to corporate rivals? Stealing your socks? Nothing, Lucas admitted, gesturing to the screens. She's either completely genuine or she knows about the surveillance. Yes, because most people assume their employer has converted an 8-figure mansion into a surveillance operation worthy of a spy film. Eliza replied dryly. Have you considered the possibility that she's simply a decent person who needs a job? Lucas ignored the question, zooming one camera in on Violet as she adjusted a vase of fresh flowers she'd brought for the entryway. It was an unauthorized addition to his meticulously designed home, yet he couldn't bring himself to object. The bright blooms added something the space had been missing, though he'd never admit it aloud. She thinks I can't see her, he mused, that I'm trapped in a wheelchair dependent on her help. Yet she treats me with respect rather than pity. Why? The real question, Eliza said, is why that surprises you. Later that afternoon, Lucas maintained his charade as Violet helped him through the physical therapy exercises that were supposedly critical to his recovery. Her hands were gentle but firm as she guided his movements, never lingering inappropriately yet providing necessary support. You're making excellent progress, she observed, helping him back into the wheelchair after a series of stretches. Your muscle tone is remarkably good for someone who's been immobilized. Lucas detected a hint of something in her voice. Not quite suspicion, but perhaps curiosity. I was in good physical condition before the accident, he replied, watching her reaction carefully. Of course, she agreed, though her eyes briefly flickered to where his cast met his skin, looking for the muscle atrophy that should have been present but wasn't. She knows something isn't right, Lucas realized with a jolt of surprise. She's noticed the inconsistencies, yet she hasn't said anything. As the days progressed, Lucas found himself increasingly aware of Violet's subtle observations. She never directly questioned his condition, but he caught her noticing details that didn't align with his story. The lack of pressure sores, the way his supposedly weakened legs occasionally tensed with natural muscle memory when startled, the absence of certain medications that would typically be prescribed for his condition. Each time, she would register the information and continue her duties without comment. It was as if she were conducting her own quiet investigation while maintaining a perfect professional facade. This unexpected dynamic left Lucas feeling oddly exposed. Despite being the one orchestrating the deception, he'd designed this scenario to test her, yet increasingly felt as though he were the one being evaluated. One evening, as a rare spring storm lashed the windows with rain, Lucas observed Violet through the cameras as she sat at the kitchen table during her break. She was speaking quietly on her phone, tension evident in her posture. "I know the payment is late, Daniel," she said, her voice carrying through the hidden microphones. "I've sent everything I can spare. Your tuition comes first, we've discussed this." A pause as she listened to the response. "No, don't withdraw from any classes. I'll figure something out. The rent can wait another week." Her hand pressed against her forehead. "How's your project coming?" "The solar engineering thing?" Lucas watched as her expression softened at whatever her brother replied, a genuine smile replacing her worry. "That's amazing, Danny. Mom would be so proud of you." The intimate glimpse into her personal struggles stirred something uncomfortable in Lucas's chest. He had assumed his test was simply about protecting his business interests. Now, watching Violet sacrifice her own security for her brother's future, while treating a deceptive employer with unfailing compassion, he confronted an unexpected truth. Perhaps this charade revealed more about his character than hers. The next morning, Lucas checked his surveillance feeds and froze. Violet was in his office, an area she had no reason to enter before his usual wake-up time. His fingers tensed on the keyboard as he prepared to finally witness the betrayal he had been expecting. Instead, she was simply placing something on his desk. When she left, he switched to the office camera and zoomed in. There sat a small vase with a single stem of lavender and a note. "Research shows natural scents can improve cognitive function and mood during recovery. Thought you might enjoy this in your workspace today. No ulterior motive, no invasion of privacy. Just a small, thoughtful gesture that she likely assumed would go unrecognized until he was wheeled into the office hours later. For the first time since beginning this deception, Lucas felt genuinely ashamed. Growing connections by the fourth week of his charade, Lucas found himself struggling in ways he hadn't anticipated. The physical pretense was simple enough. He had mastered the wheelchair navigation, the careful movements, the occasional, accidental displays of discomfort. What he hadn't prepared for was the psychological impact of prolonged deception, particularly against someone who had proven herself to be unfailingly kind. Violet had integrated seamlessly into his daily routine, anticipating his needs with quiet efficiency, and gradually introducing small improvements to his living environment. The cold modernist mansion had subtly transformed. Fresh flowers appeared in previously sterile spaces, bookshelves were rearranged for better access from wheelchair height, and the kitchen now contained actual food rather than just protein bars and coffee. Most disconcerting of all, Lucas found himself genuinely enjoying her company. Their conversations had evolved from purely practical exchanges to discussions about everything from quantum computing to her brother's solar engineering projects. Violet possessed a quick mind and refreshing directness that made even ordinary interactions engaging. "You never talk about family," Violet observed one evening as she prepared dinner in the kitchen while Lucas sat at the island, ostensibly reviewing contracts but actually watching how the sunset light played across her features. "There's not much to tell," he replied, the truth slipping out before he could craft a more careful response. "My parents were more interested in Sinclair Technologies than in their son. They died in a private plane crash when I was 22, leaving me the company and very little else." Violet glanced up from the vegetables she was chopping. "I'm sorry. That must have been difficult." "It was business," Lucas said, the old deflection automatic. "The company needed leadership, so I provided it." "That doesn't mean you didn't also need something," she replied quietly. The simple observation caught him off guard. For years, Associates and therapists alike had tried to get him to discuss the emotional impact of his parents' death and his sudden ascension to corporate leadership. He had rebuffed them all with practiced ease. Yet somehow Violet's matter-of-fact statement slipped past his defenses. What I needed was irrelevant, he found himself saying. 17,000 employees depended on Sinclair Tech's stability. Personal considerations weren't a priority. Violet continued cooking, allowing a thoughtful silence rather than pushing with unwanted sympathy. My parents died in a car accident when Daniel was just 10, she finally said. I was 22, just finished nursing school. Everyone kept asking what I needed, offering help, but all I could think about was making sure Danny didn't feel the world had ended. The parallel to his own experience hung in the air between them. Lucas had spent over a decade building walls around the memory of that time, yet in a few simple sentences, Violet had created a bridge across them. How did you manage? He asked, genuinely curious. One day at a time, she said with a small smile, some days better than others. But we found joy where we could. She slid a plate in front of him, simple roasted chicken with herbs and vegetables. Nothing elaborate but prepared with evident care. Having someone to be strong for makes it easier, I think. Gives purpose to the pain. That night, reviewing the day's surveillance footage, Lucas found himself repeatedly returning to that conversation. The cameras had captured something his in-person defenses had missed. The moment when his carefully constructed persona had briefly fallen away, revealing genuine connection. It was dangerous, this unexpected rapport. It complicated the narrative he had created and blurred the clear lines of his experiment. Worse, it intensified the guilt that had been building with each passing day. What had begun as a reasonable security precaution increasingly felt like a violation of trust. The next morning, his internal conflict was interrupted by the sound of distress from the kitchen. Hurrying to his monitoring room, Lucas found Violet on camera, her phone pressed to her ear, face drained of color. When did it happen? She was asking, her normally steady voice trembling. Yes, I understand. I'll be there as soon as possible. She ended the call and pressed a shaking hand to her mouth, taking several deep breaths before straightening her shoulders with visible effort. Lucas watched as she composed herself and came to find him, knocking softly on his bedroom door. When he called for her to enter, her professional mask was back in place, though he could see the strain beneath it. Mr. Sinclair, I apologize, but I have a family emergency, she said. My brother has been hospitalized. I need to take a personal day. Of course, Lucas replied, concern overriding his script. What happened? An accident in the engineering lab. Something malfunctioned during a demonstration. Her composure slipped slightly. They say he'll recover, but there were chemical burns and they're concerned about his eyes. Lucas made a split-second decision. Take my car and driver. They'll get you there faster than waiting for a ride service. Gratitude flashed across her face. Thank you. I'll return as soon as I can. Don't worry about that now, he interrupted. Focus on your brother. I'll manage. After she left, Lucas found himself restless. The usual monitoring felt hollow without Violet's presence in the house. Instead, he abandoned his wheelchair and paced his office, thoughts churning. Before he could reconsider, he reached for his phone and called his personal physician. I need information on a patient at Mercy Regional, he said without preamble. Daniel Mason, engineering accident admitted today. Within the hour, Lucas had a complete report. Daniel's injuries were serious but not life-threatening. Second-degree chemical burns on his hands and arms, and corneal inflammation that had doctors concerned but cautiously optimistic. What the report also revealed, buried in the administrative details, was that Daniel was uninsured, having aged out of his sister's health plan when he turned 26 3 months earlier. A few more calls, and Lucas had arranged for Daniel's transfer to a private room and consultation with the top ophthalmological specialist on the West Coast, all anonymously covered through a Sinclair Technologies Health Foundation that normally supported employees' families. That evening, surveillance alerts notified Lucas when Violet returned to the mansion. She looked exhausted, moving through the kitchen with mechanical motions as she made herself tea. When she checked her phone, he watched her expression transform from weariness to confusion and then disbelief. That's not possible, she whispered, reading something on her screen. How could they? Lucas knew what she was seeing. notification that her brother had been moved to private care, that specialists had been consulted, that financial concerns had been addressed by an anonymous donor. He hadn't expected the tears that began streaming down her face, or the way she pressed her hands against her mouth to stifle sobs of what appeared to be overwhelming relief. In all the scenarios he had imagined when planning his deception, he had never considered this, that his power to help might outweigh the dishonesty of his methods. Watching her in that unguarded moment of vulnerability, Lucas confronted an uncomfortable truth. This woman, whom he had subjected to an elaborate test of character, had passed every challenge with an integrity he himself could no longer claim. The revelation. 3 days later, Daniel's condition had stabilized enough that Violet returned to her regular schedule, though Lucas insisted she take afternoons off to visit her brother. The specialist he had arranged had successfully treated the corneal damage, ensuring Daniel would retain his vision. Through careful anonymity, Lucas had kept his involvement hidden, though Violet clearly suspected someone with influence had intervened. "Keep trying to figure out who could have arranged it all," she mentioned, one morning while helping Lucas with his supposed therapy exercises. The hospital administrator just repeats that it's an anonymous corporate donor. No one at Daniel's university claims responsibility either. "Perhaps someone recognized his potential," Lucas suggested carefully. "Your brother's solar engineering work sounds promising." Violet's hands paused on his shoulder. "How did you know the specifics of his research?" "I don't recall mentioning the solar component." Lucas froze, realizing his mistake. He had learned that detail through surveillance, not their conversations. "You must have mentioned it," he recovered smoothly, "during one of our discussions about renewable energy." Violet continued the exercise routine, but her movements had become mechanical, her eyes slightly narrowed in thought. Lucas recognized the expression. She was connecting dots, assembling observations that had been troubling her for weeks. That afternoon, Lucas watched through the cameras as Violet moved through the house with deliberate purpose during what she thought was his nap time. She examined the wheelchair when he wasn't in it, ran her fingers along the edge of his cast, and lingered near the bookshelves in his office with a considering expression. She suspects, Lucas realized. The careful investigator who had been cataloging inconsistencies from the beginning was finally compiling her evidence. Yet still she said nothing, performed her duties with the same care, maintained the pretense as diligently as he did. Why? The inevitable confrontation came sooner than he expected. That evening, Lucas was in his actual bedroom reviewing security footage on his tablet, when a power surge from the storm raging outside caused a momentary blackout. The backup generators engaged immediately, but in those few seconds of darkness and recalibration, the electronic lock on his door reset to its open position. Lucas didn't hear the door open over the sound of rain hammering against the windows. He only realized his vulnerability when he sensed movement and looked up to find Violet standing in the doorway, staring at him sitting comfortably in bed, not in his wheelchair, no cast in sight, the tablet in his hands displaying multiple camera feeds from around the house, including her own room. For a moment neither spoke. The tableau held, Violet in the doorway, her expression shifting from shock to comprehension to something harder. Lucas frozen in undeniable evidence of his deception. "You can walk," she finally said, her voice flat. "You were never injured." Lucas set the tablet aside, all prepared explanations evaporating under her direct gaze. "No, I wasn't. The wheelchair, the cast, the medications, the therapy, all fake." Each word fell like a stone between them. "You've been watching me, testing me." "Yes." The simple admission felt inadequate, but elaborate justifications would only compound the betrayal. Violet walked further into the room, her eyes moving from the tablet to the small monitoring station he had set up on his desk. "My room too? My private conversations? When I was changing clothes?" "The bathroom and changing areas are blacked out," Lucas said quickly. I wouldn't, but everything else was fair game." The controlled anger in her voice was worse than if she had shouted. "My phone calls with Daniel, my private moments, my tears when I thought my brother might lose his sight, all just data for your little experiment." "I needed to know who you really were," Lucas found himself saying, the justification sounding hollow even to his own ears. "People show different faces depending on who's watching. And what face were you showing me, Mr. Sinclair?" Violet asked, emphasizing his name with quiet devastation. The vulnerable patient? The demanding employer? Or were those just masks for the man who sits in a secret room judging others while deceiving them? The question struck with precision, targeting the contradiction at the heart of his scheme. Lucas had designed this test to evaluate character, never considering how it reflected on his own. My last assistant was selling company secrets, he said, reaching for the logical defense he had rehearsed. I needed to be certain. So you lied, Violet interrupted, her unusual eyes bright with unshed tears. You manipulated me into caring for a condition that didn't exist, into worrying about your recovery, into... She stopped herself, turning away. Do you have any idea what it costs to genuinely care for someone? To invest emotionally in their well-being, and all of it based on a lie? Lucas stood, instinctively moving toward her before stopping himself. Violet, it was you, wasn't it? She said suddenly, turning back to face him. Daniel's specialist, the private room, the mysterious donor. That was all you, he nodded silently. Why? The simple question contained multitudes. Why the help? Why the deception? Why any of it? Because he's important to you, Lucas admitted, the truth emerging despite his defenses. And you... He couldn't finish the sentence. The implications too revealing. Violet regarded him for a long moment, her expression a complex mixture of hurt, anger, and something else he couldn't quite identify. I thought I was beginning to know you, she finally said. I believed we were forming a genuine connection despite your condition, or perhaps because of the vulnerability it created. But there was no vulnerability, was there? Just calculation. The accuracy of her assessment felt like a physical blow. Lucas had indeed begun their arrangement with cold calculation. Yet somewhere along the way, genuine feelings had developed, feelings he had continued to deny even to himself. The connection was real, he said quietly. That part wasn't pretense. How would I know? Violet asked. How would I ever know what's real with you? She turned to leave, pausing at the doorway. I'll pack my things and be gone by morning. I'll send someone for anything I miss. Violet, wait, Lucas started, but she cut him off with a raised hand. You wanted to know who I really am? This is it. I'm someone who values truth even when it's difficult, who believes trust has to be earned, not tested through manipulation. And right now I'm someone who can't bear to look at you. After she left, Lucas stood motionless in the center of his room, surrounded by the technology that had allowed him to observe everything, while understanding nothing that truly mattered. The storm outside mirrored the turbulence within as he confronted the consequences of his elaborate deception. For the first time in years, Lucas Sinclair felt truly paralyzed, not by physical limitation, but by the recognition of what he had destroyed through his own actions. Redemption's path. Lucas stood at the entrance to Mercy Regional Hospital, fighting an uncharacteristic urge to turn back. 2 weeks had passed since Violet had walked out of his life, leaving behind only a formally worded resignation letter. His attempts to contact her had been met with silence, his considerable resources useless against her adamant refusal to engage. Today represented his final option, a direct approach in neutral territory. Daniel was being discharged, and Lucas had learned through hospital contacts that Violet would be arriving to bring her brother home. It was an intrusion on their privacy, yet another presumption on his part, but desperation had overridden his better judgment. He spotted her immediately, standing at the discharge desk in simple jeans and a sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders rather than in the practical style she had maintained while working for him. Even from a distance he could see the fatigue in her posture, the strain of recent weeks evident in the set of her shoulders. When she turned and saw him, her expression shuddered immediately. She finished her paperwork with deliberate calm before approaching him. What are you doing here? No greeting, no warmth, just direct confrontation. I needed to see you, Lucas replied, acutely aware that his usual confidence offered no advantage here. To explain, to apologize. I'm not interested in explanations, Violet interrupted. I understand exactly what happened. You constructed an elaborate test because you value security over humanity. You learned what you wanted to know about my character. Transaction complete. Her clinical assessment made him wince. That's not... It started that way, yes, but it became something else. Something I didn't anticipate. Mr. Sinclair, Lucas, he corrected, hating the formality that had returned between them. Mr. Sinclair, she repeated firmly, I'm here for my brother, who has been through a genuine medical crisis, not a fabricated one. This isn't the time or place. Before he could respond, a nurse wheeled